She smirked and said, "He's more of a man than you ever will be." I stayed silent, finished my drink, and walked away without a scene. Days later, when everything collapsed around her, she finally understood what she lost. "He's more of a man than you ever will be." She said it with a smirk, not whispered, not muttered under her breath the way people say things they regret later. She said it clearly, deliberately, loud enough for the 4 people standing in that circle to hear every single word. And then she looked back at him, at Qley, with a smile she hadn't given me in months. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't set down my glass dramatically or clench my jaw or do any of the things that the anger inside me was quietly begging me to do. I just took one slow sip of my whiskey, let the burn sit for a second, and then I placed the glass on the nearest table, turned around, and walked straight to the door. No scene. No last word. No looking back. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I was 29 when that night happened. We had been together for 3 years, Tessa and I. Long enough to have a drawer at each other's places. Long enough to have survived 1 move, 2 job changes, and a handful of fights that felt like the end of the world at the time. But not long enough, apparently, for her to understand what she was actually holding. The party was at her coworker's house. A guy named Preston who had more square footage than taste, and who threw these semi-regular gatherings that were really just excuses for people in their late 20s to stand around, drink good whiskey, and pretend they weren't silently sizing each other up. Tessa had wanted me to come. She'd asked twice that week, actually, in that tone she used when she was hoping I'd say yes, but prepared to be disappointed. I said yes. I drove. I even put on the jacket she liked. Qley was already there when we arrived. I'd heard the name before, once, briefly, in passing, something about him joining her department a few months back. She described him the way you describe someone you're trying not to describe too specifically. He's just a coworker. He's kind of funny, I guess. You'd probably like him. I remember thinking nothing of it at the time. I remember wishing now that I had paid a little more attention. He was tall in that effortless way, broad shoulders, easy laugh, the kind of guy who fills a room without seeming to try. And the moment Tessa spotted him across Preston's living room, something in her posture changed. It was subtle. It was the kind of thing only someone who has spent 3 years studying a person's body language would notice. Her spine straightened. Her chin lifted slightly. She touched her hair. I watched all of it happen in the span of about 4 seconds, and I told myself I was imagining things. We made our way over. She introduced me the way you introduce someone you're not sure how to introduce. Not with pride. Not with warmth. With a kind of flat neutrality that I noticed immediately and filed away somewhere in the back of my brain where I kept things I wasn't ready to confront yet. "This is my boyfriend," she said. "Not my name. Not this is the person I've built a life with. Just my boyfriend. Like a label. Like a category." Qley shook my hand and smiled the way men smile when they've already decided they don't need to compete because they've already won. The conversation started normally enough. Preston joined, then a woman named Gwen who worked in their department, then a guy whose name I never caught, but who laughed too loud at everything Qley said. And slowly, gradually, the way these things happen, the dynamic of the circle shifted. Qley started telling stories. He was good at it, I'll give him that. He had this rhythm, this natural ease, the kind of storytelling that pulls people in without them realizing they've been pulled. He talked about hiking a mountain in Patagonia. He talked about pitching a project to a client in Berlin. He talked about a weekend he spent rebuilding an old motorcycle engine in his garage. Every story landed. Every punchline hit. And Tessa laughed at every single one. Not politely. Not the way you laugh to be kind. She laughed genuinely, fully, with her whole face. The same laugh I used to be able to get out of her without trying. I stood there quietly, sipping my drink, watching it happen in real time. I tried to join the conversation. Once, I made a comment about the Patagonia trip, something about a similar trail I'd read about, an overlapping route, and Qley nodded politely, said, "Yeah, totally," and turned back to Tessa to continue the story. Smooth. Clean. So subtle that no one else probably noticed the dismissal. But I felt it. The circle thinned out after a while. Preston drifted toward the kitchen. Gwen got pulled into another conversation. The loud laughing guy disappeared somewhere. And then it was just the 3 of us. That's when the tone changed. Tessa started asking Qley questions that felt less like curiosity and more like admiration. About his career trajectory. About the clients he'd worked with. About how he'd gotten so good at presenting. Each question was delivered with her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in. Honestly, I couldn't even remember the last time I'd seen that look directed at me. Cole, to his credit, kept glancing at me as if checking whether I was going to say something. I didn't. I just kept drinking. And then, in the middle of one of these exchanges, Tessa said something that set the whole trajectory of the night spinning. She said, "I just think confidence is the most attractive thing in a person." She didn't look at me when she said it. She was looking at Cole. Cole smiled slowly. "I think it comes down to knowing what you want," he said. "Exactly," Tessa said. And then, "I still don't fully understand why she did this." She looked at me. "Just for a second. The way you look at an example of something when you're in the middle of making a point." Cole caught the look. He said nothing. Just let the silence stretch out. I put down my drink. Not because I was about to say something. Just because I needed something to do with my hands. "I'm going to get a refill," I said. Tessa waved vaguely. Didn't offer to come. Didn't pause the conversation. I walked to the bar table at the far end of the room, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, and stood there for a long moment with my back to them, just breathing. I told myself to calm down. I told myself I was reading into things. I told myself that 3 years didn't dissolve into nothing in the middle of a party because your girlfriend laughed a little too hard at someone else's stories. I told myself a lot of things that I already knew, somewhere deep down, weren't entirely true. And then I turned around and walked back. The circle had reformed. 2 other people had joined. I didn't know either of them. Tessa and Cole were in the middle of something. Another story, another exchange. And as I stepped back into the group, I caught the tail end of whatever had been said. I caught Cole saying something about people who coast through life without ambition. I caught Tessa nodding. And then, again, I cannot fully explain why she did this. She glanced at me. Same look. Same fraction of a second. Same pointed, deliberate meaning. One of the people who'd just joined, a woman named Carla, I later found out, who worked in the building next to theirs and who had apparently heard about me through office gossip, said something then that I hadn't expected. She looked at me and said, "So what do you do?" "Just conversational. Just friendly small talk." I told her, "I work in structural engineering. Have for 6 years. It's not glamorous. It's not Patagonia or Berlin or motorcycle engines in garages. But it's mine, and I'm good at it. And I've spent the better part of a decade building something real with it." Before I could finish my second sentence, Tessa said something. It came out lightly, casually, in the way the sharpest things are always delivered. She said, "He's very steady." Pause. "Safe." And she smiled. The word landed differently than she maybe intended. Or maybe exactly as she intended. Safe. Not capable. Not committed. Not steady in the way a foundation is steady. Something you build everything else on top of. Safe. Like something you keep around because it doesn't cause problems. I looked at her. She held my gaze for exactly 1 second before her eyes drifted back to Cole. Cole, to his credit again, looked mildly uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. He tried to redirect, said something about how structural engineering was actually really impressive work. But the moment had already happened. The word had already been said. And Tessa, seemingly emboldened by something she'd decided in her own head, wasn't done. What came next happened fast. Carla, still friendly, said something like, "That sounds like really meaningful work though. Keeping buildings standing." I nodded. Said something about the satisfaction of it. And Cole agreed, genuinely, I think. Said something about how craftsmanship mattered more than most people realized. And Tessa laughed. Not at anything specific. Just laughed. A dismissive, light little exhale of sound. The kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh at all. Cole looked at her. "What?" he said. And Tessa shrugged, still smiling, and said, "Nothing. It's just..." She paused, tilted her head slightly, and looked at me. "He's more of a man than you ever will be." There it was. Clean. Simple. Devastating. The circle went quiet. Carla's expression shifted. Uncomfortable, uncertain where to look. Cole's eyebrows rose slightly, and for the first time that night, he looked genuinely caught off guard. And Tessa kept smiling, like she'd just said something clever. Like she was testing something and waiting to see what would break first. I felt the anger come up. I felt it in my chest, specific and hot. I felt the words form. All of them. Every sharp and accurate thing I could have said right then and there, in front of Preston's living room, with a room full of people within earshot. I felt the very real, very human impulse to match her energy, to fight back, to not just stand there and absorb it. And then I let it pass. Like a wave. Like something I'd been trained for without knowing it. I took one slow sip of my whiskey, let the burn sit, put the glass down on the nearest table, and I walked out. No raised voice, no slammed door, no parting line to land for the crowd, just out. The night air outside Preston's house was cold. I stood on the front step for a moment, hands in my jacket pockets, and took a long breath. My car was parked half a block down. I walked to it, got in, sat for a minute with the engine off, just staring at the dashboard, and then I drove home. She texted at 11:47. Where did you go? I didn't answer. She texted again at 12:15. Can you just reply so I know you're okay? I set my phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. She called in the morning. I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour later. I answered that time, not because I was ready, but because I'd spent the night thinking and I'd come to the quiet, inevitable conclusion that there was only one conversation that needed to happen now, and there was no point delaying it. Hey, she said. Her voice was careful, the way voices get when someone isn't sure what version of the other person they're about to encounter. Hey, I said. Long pause. Are you mad? I thought about that for a second. Was I mad? Not exactly. Or not only. Not really, I said. Then why did you just leave? Because I didn't want to make a scene. Another pause. I could hear her breathing. I was just talking. You know how I get when I've had a few drinks. Tessa. She stopped. I'm not going to do this, I said. Do what? The conversation where you explain what you meant by what you said in a way that makes it sound like I misunderstood. She was quiet for a long time. Then, I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Okay, I said. Cole was talking about all this stuff, and you were just standing there not saying anything, and I got frustrated. You got frustrated? Yes. And the solution to your frustration was to tell a group of people that another man is more of a man than I am. Silence. Heavy, specific, loaded silence. I'm sorry, she said finally. I know, I said. Then can we just? I need some time, I said. Time for what? To figure out what I actually think about last night. She didn't like that answer. I could tell by the shift in her breathing. You're making this into something bigger than it is. Maybe, I said. Or maybe you've been saying things like that for months, and last night was just the first time you said one out loud in front of other people. That one landed. I heard it in the silence. I'll call you in a few days, I said. And I hung up. I didn't call in a few days. I took a week. During that week, I did the thing I'd been avoiding for most of the past several months. I actually sat with everything. Not just last night. Not just the things she'd said, but all of it. The way she'd started talking about Qley 3 months before the party. The way conversations between us had started to feel like obligations rather than choices. The way she'd stopped asking about my work, my projects, the things I was genuinely proud of, and started measuring my value against a sliding scale I hadn't been consulted about. The way she laughed at Cole's stories versus the way she laughed at mine. The way she'd said safe, like it was a quiet insult dressed up as a descriptor. I thought about something a former colleague once told me, years ago, over drinks after a project had fallen apart. He said, the most expensive thing in the world is a person who knows your worth and still decides you're not enough. I thought it was a throwaway line at the time. I thought about it differently now. I also, during that week, noticed something I probably should have noticed sooner. I wasn't devastated. I was clear. There's a difference. Devastation is when something you believed in collapses and takes part of you with it. Clarity is when something you suspected finally proves itself true, and you realize the collapse happened a long time ago. You just hadn't looked directly at the wreckage yet. I was clear. I knew what I was going to say. I knew what needed to happen. I just wanted to make sure I was saying it from a calm place rather than an angry one. Because angry words become the story later. Calm ones become the ending. When I finally called her back, she answered on the second ring. I was starting to think you'd just disappeared, she said. No, I said. I was thinking, and I think we should end this. The pause that followed was different from the ones before. Longer, heavier. Not surprised exactly, but not prepared either. Because of one night. Because of 3 months, I said. And the night was just the part one couldn't pretend I hadn't seen. That's not fair, she said. Maybe not, I said. I apologized. I know. So what else do you want from me? I thought about that question for a moment. What did I want from her? An explanation? A full accounting of every thought she'd had about Qley over the past 3 months? A detailed confession of exactly when she'd started comparing me to him and finding me wanting? No, none of that would have changed anything. I don't want anything from you, I said. I just don't want to keep being with someone who's been auditioning replacements while I was standing right there. She started to object. I kept going. You can tell me I'm wrong, I said. You can tell me that's not what was happening. But you and I both know what that night was. Another silence. Longer this time. I didn't mean for it to go that far, she said quietly. And there it was. Not a denial. An admission dressed in softer language. I know, I said. And somehow, that made it worse. Not better. Because knowing she hadn't intended for it to go that far meant the cruelty hadn't been a choice. It had just been what came naturally when the mask slipped. We ended the call shortly after. Tessa cried. I felt sorry about that, genuinely. Not sorry enough to change my mind, but sorry. I moved the rest of her things to a box within the week. She picked them up one afternoon while I was at work. I'd left the key under the mat the way we'd agreed. I came home to an apartment that felt exactly the same on the surface and entirely different underneath. I made dinner, watched something on TV that I probably couldn't have named an hour later, went to bed, and somewhere in the middle of that unremarkable evening, I realized I felt lighter than I had in months. 2.5 weeks passed. Work filled the space. I picked up a project I'd been putting off, one that required long hours and a lot of focused thinking, and I dove into it with the kind of full attention I hadn't been able to give anything in a while. A colleague named Pete noticed. You seem different, he said one morning, over bad office coffee. Different how? I don't know. Less somewhere else. I thought about that. Yeah, I said. I think I'm just more here lately. He nodded like he understood without needing the explanation. Some people are like that. I didn't think about Tessa every day. Some days, sure. The 3 years were real. They didn't just evaporate because the ending had been bad. But the thoughts when they came were quieter than I'd expected. Not longing. More like review. Like going back through blueprints for a building that didn't quite hold. Looking for the stress points. Understanding where the cracks started before they became breaks. About 3 weeks after the breakup, I ran into Preston at a coffee shop near my apartment. I didn't recognize him immediately. I'd only met him once, at the party, and we hadn't spoken much. He recognized me. He stopped, visibly awkward, clearly calculating whether to pretend he hadn't seen me. He decided not to. Hey, he said. Hey, I said. We did the obligatory 5 minutes of small talk. How are you? What's new? The usual. And then he paused, and I could see him deciding something. I heard about you and Tessa, he said. Yeah, I said. That sucks, man. I'm sorry. I thanked him. He hesitated again. Then, can I say something without it being weird? Sure, I said. That night at my place, what she said to you. He shook his head slightly. I thought about it after you left. I should have said something in the moment. You didn't need to. Still, he said. It was a crappy thing for her to do. I nodded. Thanked him again. We parted ways. I walked back to my car thinking about the fact that even Preston, a guy I barely knew, who had no particular stake in any of it, had recognized in real time that something wrong had been done. Sometimes you just need a stranger's confirmation to know you weren't imagining it. About a week after that, I got a text from a number I didn't immediately recognize. Hey, it's Carla. We met at Preston's. I got your number from him. Hope that's okay. I stared at it for a second, placing the name. The woman from the circle that night. The one who'd asked what I did and gotten Tessa's safe in response. I texted back. Hey, yeah, what's up? She said she'd been meaning to reach out for a couple weeks. Said she felt weird about it, but wanted to say that she'd been thinking about what Tessa had said that night, and she thought it was genuinely awful, and that she was sorry she hadn't said anything in the moment either. I told her she didn't owe me an apology. She said maybe not, but she'd wanted to say it anyway. We texted back and forth for a little while. She was easy to talk to, direct, sharp sense of humor, not the kind of person who pads their sentences with unnecessary softness. We ended up grabbing coffee a few days later. Nothing loaded about it. Just two people who'd both witnessed something strange and awkward and were processing it in their own ways. But it was good. It felt like a reminder that not everything in that world had been poisoned. And then, on a Tuesday evening about 5 weeks after the breakup, my phone rang. It was Tessa. I looked at the screen for 2 full rings. And then I answered. Hi, she said. Her voice was different. Something stripped out of it that I hadn't heard stripped out before. Hi, I said. Can I talk to you? You're already talking to me. I mean really talk. Not a 5-minute check-in. Something real. I sat back in my chair. Okay, I said. What's going on? She let out a breath. And then she started talking. It came out in pieces. She said Cole had started pulling away about 2 weeks after the party. Said the energy had shifted. The attention, the interest, The magnetic pull she'd been so drawn to had started to dim the way a light dims when the power source isn't consistent. She said she tried harder, had stayed later at work on the nights she knew he was still in the building, had engineered reasons to be around him, had done, in other words, exactly what I'd watched her do, redirected all that warmth and energy and attention towards someone else, like water finding a lower level. And he'd taken it, for a while, and then he'd grown bored, or grown distracted, or moved on to someone else entirely. She wasn't fully sure which, and maybe it didn't matter. The result was the same. She'd poured 3 months of carefully managed feeling into a man who'd never asked her to, and who ultimately had no particular investment in what he'd caught. He started dating someone from the marketing floor, she said. Nobody even told me. I just found out through the group chat. I didn't say anything. And then, she paused. Then I started thinking about what I'd actually done, what I'd actually said. And I couldn't stop thinking about your face when you walked out. I let the silence sit for a moment. My face when I walked out. I said. You weren't angry, she said. I know. That was worse than angry, she said quietly. I know that too. She was quiet again. Then, I think I convinced myself you were something you weren't. What do you mean? I was so in my head about Cole, about whatever I thought he represented, that I started turning you into the opposite. Like you were the reason I wasn't that person. What person? The person I told myself I wanted to be with someone exciting. I thought about that for a second. And was I? I said, were you what? The reason? Was I holding you back from that? Long pause. No, she said. No. I needed something to justify wanting it. And you were there. I took a slow breath. There are things you already know. Things you figured out alone in your apartment in the weeks after someone walks out of your life. And then there are the moments when those things get spoken out loud by the person you needed to hear them from. Not because you need them anymore, but because the confirmation closes something. I lost you because I was chasing someone who was never going to stay, she said. Her voice had gone flat. Not cold, just clear. The way voices get when someone has been repeating a painful truth to themselves long enough that the emotion has mostly burned off and left just the fact. He was never serious, she said. Cole, not for a second. And you were serious your whole life, and I used it against you. I didn't argue. I didn't validate either. I just let her talk. Because sometimes that's the only thing you can actually give someone. Not comfort. Not forgiveness wrapped in a bow. Just the space to say the true thing. She talked for a while. About what had shifted in her over those months. About the dissatisfaction she'd been sitting with. Some of it real, some of it manufactured. About the way she'd started filtering everything I did through a lens that was designed to find me lacking. About the way that lens had sharpened every time Cole said something that made her laugh. I compared you, she said. I know. Constantly. Unfairly. I know that too. And you never said anything. No, I said. Why not? I thought about that. Why hadn't I? Because I told myself I was imagining it. Because I told myself it would pass. Because there's a very specific kind of fear that lives in the gap between suspecting something is wrong and knowing it for certain. And as long as I stayed in that gap, things could still be okay. And then one night she said it out loud and the gap closed. I was waiting, I said. For what? For you to come back on your own. Or to show me clearly enough that you weren't going to. Pause. You showed me clearly enough. The silence that followed that was different from all the others. It was the silence of someone sitting with a thing they couldn't undo. Not the silence of regret exactly. Worse than that. The silence of understanding. Full, accurate, too late understanding. Do you hate me? She asked. No, I said. Not even a little. Not even a little. That might be worse, she said. And I almost laughed. Because she was right. Hate would have been easier to sit with. Hate is still heat. What I had was just done. Clear and finished and done. We talked for another 20 minutes or so. She asked whether there was any version of a path forward. I was honest. I told her no. Not because I wanted to punish her. Not because I was performing some version of dignified stoicism for her benefit. But because the thing that had ended wasn't just about one night at a party. It was about 3 months of slow erosion. It was about the quiet accumulation of 100 small moments where she'd chosen to look past me at something she thought was better. You don't rebuild from that. You understand it and you move. You were always more than I gave you credit for, she said before she hung up. I thought about the right response to that. Decided there wasn't one. Take care of yourself, I said. And that was it. I set the phone down. Sat in the quiet for a little while. Thought about those 3 years. The real parts, the early months, the warmth of it, the way she used to look at me before she started looking through me. None of it had been nothing. It had been real, which meant it could also end. Real things end. That's not a tragedy. That's just how it goes. Preston texted me a few weeks after that. Said a group of people from his building were going bowling on a Friday and asked if I wanted to come. I said sure. Carla was there. We talked most of the night. She was different than I'd expected. Funnier, more quietly observant, the kind of person who notices things without announcing that she's noticed them. I'm not going to turn that into something it wasn't. It was just a good night. But it was a reminder of something. That the world outside a relationship that's slowly losing oxygen is large. That people exist who will hold eye contact when you're talking. That not every room you walk in has to feel like a test you're failing. Months later, I ran into someone from Tessa's office at a conference downtown. We'd met a few times over the years, a guy named Rob who worked in the floor above her department. We got coffee. He asked how I was doing. I said good. He said he'd heard things had ended with Tessa. I said yeah. He hesitated the way people hesitate when they have information they're deciding whether to offer. I let him decide. She quit, he said eventually. The job? He nodded. Said the situation with Qley had apparently made things complicated in the office. Not in a dramatic way, but in the way that situations always make things complicated. Said she'd taken a position somewhere downtown. Fresh start, probably. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. I want to be clear about that. There's a version of this story where the narrator feels vindicated when the person who hurt him has to start over. That's not this story. What I felt was nothing specific, just a kind of finality. The last piece of a thing settling into place. She had wanted something exciting. She had chased it. She had given up something steady and real in exchange for something that felt like motion. And the thing she'd chased had moved on without her. That's not poetic justice. That's just what happens when you decide the grass is greener and then find out the other side doesn't even have a fence you can lean on. The last time I heard from Tessa was a message she sent one afternoon, maybe 7 months after the breakup. Short. No preamble. I hope you're well. I mean that. I read it twice. Thought about the right response. And wrote back. Same to you. Because I did. Mean it. Because 3 years was real. Because whatever she'd become in the end, there had been a version of her before the erosion set in that I genuinely cared about. You can let something go and still wish it well. Those aren't contradictory things. What I carry from that night at Preston's party is not the cruelty of what she said. That faded fast. What I carry is the moment after, the walk to the door, the hand setting the glass down, the cold air outside, the drive home in the quiet. Because that walk was the first completely honest thing I'd done in months. Not a performance, not a statement, not a carefully constructed exit designed to make a point. Just, I was done and I left. There's something I've come to understand since then. Dignity isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need an audience or a closing line. It's just the quiet knowledge that who you are doesn't require someone else's approval to stay intact. She said I wasn't man enough. In front of people. In a room full of drinks and ambition and everything she thought she wanted. And the most honest answer I could give her, the truest, most final, most accurate response, was to finish my drink and walk away without giving her the reaction she was testing me for. Not because I had nothing to say, but because some things are beneath a response. Not beneath you, beneath a response. There's a difference. I think about Qley sometimes. Not with anger. With a kind of detached understanding. He was charming. He was interesting. He had the kind of energy that fills a room effortlessly. And he meant exactly nothing. Not to Tessa. Not to anyone at that party. Not beyond the hour of the story he was telling. There are people like that. All surface, brilliantly lit, catching every eye in the room. And then you try to lean on them, and there's nothing there. Not malice. Just air. The thing she'd wanted from him wasn't really him. It was the feeling. The feeling of being chosen by someone who seemed like a prize. The feeling of being in the orbit of something that moved fast and burned bright. She'd been with me. With something real and warm and consistent. And she'd looked past it for a feeling that turned out to be temporary by design. You can't give someone the stability of a foundation and also be the spark of a fuse. Not at the same time. Not sustainably. And when people want both from a single source, when they demand that the person who shows up reliably also perform the constant electricity of someone who might not show up at all, they're not asking for a partner. They're asking for a contradiction. And the moment the contradiction fails to hold itself together, they call it a flaw in the partner. I don't say that bitterly. I say it clearly, because I've had a lot of time to think about it. And because the version of me that walked out of that party is different from the version that would have stayed and argued. Both are real, but only one of them knew something important. Knew that the scene she was trying to start wasn't one worth having. Knew that the smartest move in a room designed to embarrass you is to leave calmly and let the room hold the memory of it alone. Some people take silence as weakness. They look for a flinch. They throw the match because they want to watch the fire. And when the fire doesn't come, when you just set down your glass and walk toward the door, they don't know what to do with that. It doesn't compute. It doesn't fit the script. And later, when things have quieted and the consequences have settled, they understand it differently. They understand that the silence wasn't defeat. It was the opposite of defeat. It was someone who already knew what they were worth and didn't need to prove it in a living room on a Friday night. I still drive past Preston Street sometimes. Not on purpose. It's just part of the route between the office and the grocery store. I don't slow down. Don't particularly feel anything when I pass it. Just a building. Just a street. Just a night that happened once and taught me something I'd carry forward. The project I threw myself into after the breakup came out well. Better than expected, actually. The kind of result that makes you feel like the work and the effort and the long nights added up to something solid. Pete clapped me on the shoulder the day we submitted it. Said something about how it was the best thing our team had produced in 2 years. I thought about the word safe for exactly 1 second, and then I let it go. Safe, steady, reliable. She'd said those words like they were insults. Like being someone people could count on was the dullest possible version of a person. But I've been in enough crumbling buildings, metaphorically, professionally, personally, to know that what saves things is never the spectacle. It's the foundation. It's the thing nobody praises until everything else has fallen apart. It's the thing that's still standing when the dramatic, exciting, fast-burning parts have become rubble. She called me safe and meant it as a diminishment. Now, months removed from it all, I choose to hear it differently. Not because I'm performing peace, but because I genuinely understand what she was seeing and why she got it wrong. She was looking at consistency and calling it limitation. She was looking at dependability and calling it dullness. She was looking at a man who didn't need to fill every room with noise and interpreting the silence as emptiness. It wasn't emptiness. It was just not performing for her. There's a version of that party where I stay, where I put the glass down and say something sharp and perfectly delivered that the room remembers, and that becomes the story everyone tells later. That version is satisfying to imagine. It plays well. It has a clear hero beat. But it's not what I wanted to be. I didn't want the last thing I ever did in that relationship to be a performance. I wanted it to be true. And the truest thing I had to offer that room was the fact that I already knew it was over. And I was okay. And I was leaving. The night air outside Preston's house was cold. I remember that clearly. I remember the way it hit my face after the warmth of the living room. I remember the half-block walk to my car. I remember sitting in the driver's seat with the engine off and just breathing. Not crying. Not shaking. Just sitting in the quiet with the knowledge that something had just ended, and that ending it cleanly, without a scene, without giving her the reaction she tested for, was the only version of that moment I could live with. I started the engine eventually, pulled out into the empty street, drove home through the kind of late-night city quiet that makes the world feel briefly like it belongs to you alone. And I thought, whatever comes next is mine. No comparison required. No performance needed. No one to prove anything to. Just mine. That thought was enough. That thought has continued to be enough. Some endings don't arrive with thunder. They arrive quietly, in a living room, over a glass of whiskey, with a smirk aimed at someone the room has already forgotten. And the response that echoes longest isn't the one that matches the volume. It's the one that simply walks away and keeps walking, without looking back.